I will never again be part of a team that's not prepared. The way I failed was I assumed, hey, we had the training, we're good to go, we know the process. I didn't sit down with the team and say, okay, do we understand that in executing this mission and firing these guns, we are potentially going to take human lives? Are we ready for this? And is everybody comfortable with that? Because if you're not, I understand, but we need to pull you off the team. Because when we get into combat, we have got to deliver. We got men and women on the other end of this who are counting on us.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. In today's episode, I'm honored to welcome Admiral Michael Rogers to the podcast. Admiral Rogers is a graduate of Auburn University and the Naval War College. He served as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and was the director of the National Security Agency, and has a storied career leading large-scale, high-stakes operations that require strategic foresight and meticulous preparation. Today, we'll discuss how leaders can set themselves and their teams up for success. From identifying key priorities to cultivating the right mindset and environment, Admiral Rogers will share his insights from decades of leadership at the highest levels of the military. You won't want to miss this episode, so stick around as we dive in. Admiral, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Now, thanks very much, Tom. Please call me Mike. I'm not much of an admiral anymore. And look, I got to tell you, every time someone thanks me for my service, I should be thanking you and the rest of our citizens. All I ever wanted to be since I was a little boy was a naval officer. I knew exactly when I was about 11 years old. I told my parents, I'm going to be a naval officer. I'm going to drive ships for a living. And I did that for the first 6 of my 37 years. But I had a dream. I got to live it as an adult. It lasted much longer than I ever thought it would. I didn't think I was going to be in for 37 years. I didn't think they were going to make me a 4-star. And so I should be thanking you. I just loved what I did. Great mission, great men and women. It's an amazing combination.
Well, I appreciate that. Yes, it's always difficult, as a former member of the military to address 4-star as by the first name, but I'll do my best. You actually remind me of Admiral Jim Hogg, who just recently passed away.
Yes, sadly.
Yeah. He told me, from the time he was a little boy, he just wanted to be the commander of a destroyer. That was all he ever wanted to be because his dad was in the Navy.
I was going to say his dad was in the Navy.
Yeah. So anyway, so he got to do that and more, obviously. All right. Well, let's get right into this conversation. I typically like to start off by defining what we're talking about. So since today's episode is about preparing for success, I think those two ideas, preparation and success, at first seem to be, straightforward probably to a lot of people, but I've actually done some research in this area specifically as it pertains to success. And I think that they're not actually necessarily easily defined truthfully. And so as you think about preparing for success, what does that mean for you?
So first, it's a reminder that the odds of success just happening without preparation are pretty low. So, because remember, as a leader, I always used to try to tell people the number one priority is mission execution. That's the only reason we were in these jobs. It was the only reason we were given this authority, given these resources. And don't get me wrong, that sometimes I would get pushback. I would say, but Mike, people are number one. And I said, no, let me be brutally direct. Mission is number one. The only reason we have people, including ourselves, is to execute the mission. Now, every strong leader knows that without motivated men and women who are well prepared, good team, understand the objective and the strategy we're going to employ, without that, you can't achieve the mission. But never forget why we're here. We're here to execute the mission. And that's how I always defined success to me. It wasn't about advancement. It wasn't about recognition. Success to me always was, hey, did we achieve the mission that we set out to? If we did that, then we could get into a discussion about degrees of success. But my fundamental premise was success is directly tied to the ability to execute the mission. That's why we're here.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Admiral Jim Loy, you may know him from, being the Commandant of the Coast Guard and so on. He was a guest on the podcast previously, and he has a favorite maxim that actually was in a book that he wrote that says preparation equals performance. And I think that frames one side of this discussion really well, because we got to think ahead, put together the plan, the skills, the necessary personnel, all the pieces, to create the potential for success for, as you said, achieving the mission, because really it is, I think, fundamentally, did you achieve the goal you set out to achieve, and so then it's a matter of
Yeah, and I think that the preparation side is equally important here because you have to prepare to execute anything. It doesn't just happen. You hope it does, but in my experience, it's not normally the way things work out. Put another way, one of the things now that I find myself, I've been out of the military for 6 years, so I'm spending a lot of time in the business community. And one thing I say to business leaders is my experience in the military has taught me there's a direct correlation to the amount of preparatory time you spend to how you'll perform actually in crisis or actually when focused on achieving the task or the mission. And that means you need to spend time up front on preparation because it'll pay off for you in execution. They're really strongly related.
Yeah. Well, to that end, do you have a good story that you can share that shows what preparation looks like.
Again, one that comes to mind, I was a junior officer at the time, so, not a senior, not running these big organizations. I was a division officer, which is an introductory role for an officer in the Navy. I was talking to the team that I was assigned to lead about, where I said, "Where do we think the target is going?" It's an intelligence, and this is after I transitioned into intelligence. So in intelligence, you're very much focused on the adversary, trying to understand what they're doing, and most importantly, what they're gonna do. And one of the things I can remember sitting down with the team was, "Hey, where do we think this particular adversary will be in 2 years? What do we think their priorities are gonna be? What do they think their tactics are gonna be? And what new capabilities might we see in the next 2 years?" And then we spent a lot of time trying to understand that for a very narrow specific target, very narrow specific mission. And then sure enough, about 18 months later, some of the things we anticipated started to unfold, and the team was ready for it. It was so great. It was so beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that brings in this idea of anticipation, right? Preparation, there's the preparation of this gets into Sansa, know thy enemy, know thyself, and you should not fear the outcome in 100 battles, right? And both of those things. So know thyself is on some level preparation, getting yourself ready for the thing. But then there's the anticipation, and that brings what is the adversary? What is your competition for those people who are in the business domain or whatever? What are they doing right now? What are they doing so that they'll be better tomorrow or the next day or whatever? So this idea of anticipating being part of preparation, that really adds a nuance to it that
Yeah,
I
I thought now, I'll be honest, I thought that that was the greatest part about being a leader in the military. My experience in the military leads me to believe led me to believe that one of our greatest challenges and one of our greatest focuses, we must prepare ourselves to excel in the face of high uncertainty and the unknown. That we get paid to anticipate what will happen, and we need to prepare for that, what we anticipate might happen, as well as a broader range of potential scenarios, which meant you constantly were talking to the team about. It'd be nice if we could anticipate exactly what's going to happen, but my experience leads me to believe we are going to be surprised by some things. Therefore, we got to figure out, how do we train ourselves? How do we structure ourselves? How do we prioritize being prepared to execute in environments of high uncertainty where we're surprised, where speed becomes really important, where trying to understand the problem becomes really important, and then building courses of action or strategies. I love that. Put another way, I can remember, when I was a four-star, thinking to myself, "This is why they spent 35 years, training me for this job." Because
yeah,
at this level, I'm dealing with President Trump, President Obama, Secretary of Defense, the Congress, foreign military
yeah,
leaders, in some cases, foreign heads of state, and and I'm thinking to myself, "Okay, we got a high level of uncertainty." As they're asking me, "Hey, Mike, what's gonna happen?" Or, "Mike, how are we gonna deal with X, Y, or Z?" I loved it. I thought to myself, "This is exactly what they trained and prepared me for. I love this challenge." I found it really energizing. For some people, it freaks them out and makes them very uncomfortable. I'm the first to acknowledge that.
yeah.
And quite the opposite for me. I found it energizing.
Yeah, I mean, just it always blows my mind that I have on so many occasions, and in this very moment, had the opportunity to have a conversation with you all, and I mean, 51 of you all, actually 52, but 51 on the record for my study, and get that you've been in these situations, like you said, presidents and Congress and heads of state and all that sort of thing, just and that I get to, on some level, peek into that and learn from that in such great ways is just profound to me, and I'm grateful for it. When as you were talking and you were sharing about anticipating the future and preparing, it reminded me of something that I think that's sort of fascinating and for listeners may seem like a non sequitur. Uh, in truth, but it's the story, and you'll know this, but I mention it for those listening, the story of rifle targets. And so, for those who are listening, they may not know that when U.S. soldiers were training to deploy to World War II, they used standard bullseye targets. So the circles, concentric
Right.
circles, and so forth. And the military found that even though the soldiers were really, really good practicing on those targets on the range, when it came to combat, their successful what we call kill rate was really not very good.
It didn't correlate well.
Right, and so subsequently, in later, iterations of the military, like for Vietnam, they changed to silhouettes of the enemy so that the soldiers got used to firing their weapons at the outline of an enemy, and subsequently, the kill rate increased dramatically. So the point there is that preparation is much more than just the mechanical processes, and that's why you got me thinking about this, because it really was much more about the cognitive, the psychological, the human factors that need to be considered when we talk about preparing.
Yeah, and, strong leadership, again, directly correlates to success in periods of high uncertainty, high stress. Humans, all of us, we look to each other for confidence. We look for each other for a sense of purpose and priority. And we look to each other to ensure, hey, I can count on these men and women to my left and my right, in front of me and behind me, right? We're one team. We got it. We're together. And that's all about the power of leadership and the power of individuals. The best thing about life in the military, in some ways, to me, was getting the chance to see these extraordinary men and women just excel and really make a difference. And you're just
Yeah.
thinking to yourself, man, are we lucky that they're on the team? They are really good. Now, as a leader, part of your job is, and I spent a lot of time on this because my view was identifying talent, getting the right people in the right jobs, trying
Mhm.
to anticipate where would these people be. I used to tell people, look, I don't want to just think about the next job. I want to think about how does the next job prepare them for 2 jobs from now. We got to think about how we build talent, how we identify potential, and you got to grow it. You just
Yeah.
can't think, hey, it's just the next job and it's up to them. I never did that, and I was very fortunate. I had some senior leadership in the military when I was a mid-level officer who looked out for me in that way and who told me that, said, "Hey, Mike, we think you have potential. We're gonna give you opportunity. You have to make the most of it, and you'll be assessed based on the opportunity, but, hey, we see potential." And I was like, "Wow." And I always tried to do the same thing. And when you get lastly, I wanted to go back to that anticipation and how you plan for the future. It can be really challenging when you get it wrong.
Mm.
There's plenty of lessons in history. Hey, the French in the buildup to the Second World War thought that a static defensive line on the border with Germany, the Maginot Line, named after their defense minister. Hey, this is a good idea. It'll drive the German. It'll stop the Germans. Well, the Germans' plan became, hey, we'll move around the flank on this thing. We'll go through Belgium, go through the Netherlands, and we'll come around. And the one that always comes to my mind as I got more senior that I really felt good about was when Cyber Command was initially created. I was the second commander, so still pretty new in the big scheme of
Yeah.
things. And I was talking to the team about, hey, in our time window, this is going to become a reality, and we're going to actually conduct offensive cyber operations. We're going to take the theory and we're going to make it reality. So I was talking to the team about, so what's our concept of how we're going to execute offensive cyber operations, and how do we think the dynamics of the target and the environment we're working in should shape our approach? And we're talking to each other, and we're coming up with, I thought, some great ideas. And I said, and this isn't about me. This is because I'm listening to these great men and women. And one of my takeaways, I said to them, what I want us to do is build a series of processes, culture. I want us to train. I want us to anticipate that we're going to be going against highly dynamic targets with high rates of change, where we're going to need to change both our tactics as well as our weapons fairly frequently, much more so than we're used to in the conventional world. I want us to think through what does that mean and how do we do it.
Mm.
So I became really proud of the fact that we really set ourselves up to work against targets with high rates of change. I watched the Russians in Ukraine and I thought to myself, you guys didn't do that. You set yourself up to work against static targets with low rates of change in which you had months of preparation time.
Mm.
And I just thought, this is what happens when you fundamentally get the vision wrong. And now you're actually in execution and you're not doing well. You're not achieving this. In this case, the Russians are not achieving the success against Ukrainian networks and cyber associated systems that I think they had hoped for as the conflict went on. And that was in part in my mind. I thought, you guys got a flawed strategy and methodology. You assess the targets were going to be fairly dynamic and you're going to have months to prepare. And that's not the way things are working in
Yeah.
Ukraine. Highly dynamic, constant high rates of change in terms of network configurations, in terms of
Yeah.
the Ukrainian ability to learn about what they're seeing in the cyber arena.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably says a lot or goes a long way with regard to Ukraine's ability to, I mean, what are we, 3 years in?
Yeah. To the
Uh,
second invasion. Remember, this is the second time they've
right.
invaded that.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. So their ability to still be at it against a
Yeah, they have
much,
proven highly resilient.
oh, yeah.
Highly resilient. I think there's a lot for us to learn across many facets of
Yeah.
warfare and civil society and the military. I think there's a lot to be learned there.
Yeah. Well, there was something you were talking about there just a couple minutes ago where you were talking about your desire to have an impact. What I'll say was have an impact on these people you were leading and their capability moving forward over the next two positions, right? Like you were looking into the future, and that was kind of your metric on some level of success. It sounded like, and so that leads me to really wanting to talk about defining success and some work that I'd done previously because I think it's interesting and germane to our conversation. But I did this study a few years ago, and I was looking at what it takes to be successful in academic medicine. Okay, because I was wanting to basically provide a map, a roadmap, right? So when some junior person comes in, I could say, well, if you want to be the chief of a division, if you want to be the chair of a department, if you want to be the dean of the medical school, what would you need to accomplish by which timeline to be able to get there, right? So that was fundamentally, I was trying to level the playing field so everybody knew the secret behind the game, if you will, right? So we did this interview study where we interviewed similar to what I did with the 4 stars, but we interviewed 40 full professors in the Stanford School of Medicine and asked them, "Hey, what did it take for you to achieve success?" And as smart people who are thoughtful will sometimes do, annoyingly, they said, "Well, how do you define success?" Right? And I was like, "Hey, that's a good question." And so we turned that back around on them and said, "Well, how do you define success?" And from that question, we really took it into a different dimension, and we ended up finding that success for those really exceptionally accomplished people wasn't about hitting some number, whether that's number of publications or things like that. It wasn't about being, "Oh, I'm a world-renowned expert in lung physiology," or whatever, any of those sorts of associated things that one might think of that are important for gaining rank in the academic sphere. It was much more about making an impact, making a difference in the area where they really were passionate. And that always turned out to be something that really wasn't their specialty in medicine. It was a bigger conceptualization of success for them, and so that got me thinking as I was preparing for our conversation. I was thinking about success, and I'd like to get your take on this because it's nascent in its formulation, but I think there's something really important about it, about this frame. I'm usually very good at creating cognitive frameworks, and so I've been thinking about this sort of 3 echelons, if you will, of success. There's what forgive the terms for not being perfect at this point, but there's the micro level or personal level. We got to be prepared as individuals to complete our mission. There's the meso, sort of middle, and I would say that's organizational level. So we as leaders, we got to be sure things are prepared to accomplish the mission. The team is ready, organizational, and so forth. We got the resources. But then there's the macro, and the macro is more sort of an overarching level of success. It's the one that's about lasting success and legacy and the impact that we really made. And so I think that I've been thinking more about that meso or organizational and macro or societal legacy, that sort
Right.
of thing, if we want to be successful. Anyway, I want to get your thoughts on that because
So
I've
I
been,
think that also goes to what kind of expectation do you want to set as a leader?
mm,
Cyber Command is an example of my last, job. I told the team, our goal is not to be good. Our goal is to be great. I want the rest of the world to fear our capabilities. I want the rest of the world to stop and pause and say to them, ooh, Cyber Command is potentially, engaged in a series of activities. Either, both we work defense as well as offense. And I said, look, the nation has given us these amazing resources. It's given us this set of authorities. It has invested in us. We didn't exist 5 years ago, when I
yeah,
first got there. I said, "Look, we've been given a great opportunity." And the nation has done that because they believe that we can make a difference and we can provide a great set of capabilities for the nation. And so my comment was, I'm not interested in being good. I want us to be great. And I want us constantly as leaders to be talking about that so our people understand what the expectation is. Because I just found groups that are positive, that are always striving to be better, that aren't complacent, that aren't satisfied with the minimum. Those are the kinds of teams I always love being a part of.
right, yeah,
I never liked being part of. Hey, just do the minimum and knock off. And
right,
I'm like, I'm
yeah,
not wired that way. I don't enjoy that. I didn't like being parts of teams that had that kind of attitude.
yeah. My wife and I talk about this quite often. There's certain people that we know on some level, just because it takes so much energy to be not that person, to be the kind of like you're describing, right? The person who's always trying to, how do we get better? How do we make this better? How do we improve? How do we grow? That takes a lot of energy because that's the state I'm in constantly, like you. But we've got these friends, some friends who just have this capability, I'll call it, for not being that way, right? Like they're just, hey, like we're here and we're just gonna sip mai tais, and then we're gonna hang out. So anyway, good on them, I guess. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm the
and then
kind of
part of
person
that
that's,
becomes, so how do you infuse that in the rest of the team? So it's not
oh,
about
that's a
you.
good question.
How do you infuse that in the broader team? Not just at the senior leadership level, but all the way down. I wanted everybody. I used to try to talk about this all the time. Didn't matter how junior the audience was. Hey, what is our expectation for ourselves? What is the expectation we want to set for this organization? What do you want when you look back on your career? When you look back on your time with, in this case, Cyber Command, what what do you want to walk away with? What is the feeling and the sense of accomplishment that you want to walk away? And I don't want that to be, well, I met the minimums.
All right, we
That is
scrape
not
by.
the legacy that I want to think back on.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember General Gene Reinhardt when I first interviewed him. He said, "Look, let's don't just go into this to be okay, to be average." Right? That was his same approach. So, well, talking about preparation and the importance of it, just from just an elementary question, why, from your perspective, is preparation so important for success?
Because preparation helps you anticipate uncertainty. Preparation lets you make mistakes in a benign environment. Preparation enhances your learning. Preparation increases your confidence level. Preparation increases your performance under stress. I mean, and the military just pounds this into you. We train constantly. We constantly would ask ourselves, okay, let's come up with 5 scenarios that we might have to deal with. All right, let's go. That's why,
Yeah,
for example, in the military, we always talk about, plans are nothing, planning is everything. It's that
yeah,
preparatory process that the planning forces us to do that generates the advantage that when we fail to exactly anticipate what's gonna happen, we've still got a great base to work from. It gives us competitive advantage because 'cause we're starting at a better prepared place than we would be without that kind of preparation, without that kind of thinking. Even though it was imperfect, it didn't automatically or perfectly predict what we were dealing with. It gave us a great starting point.
yeah. I agree with you. And as I mentioned, Admiral Loy, I mean, preparation, equals performance. I mean, if we're going to be successful, we got to be prepared. And I think as I've looked at different professional domains, not the military, but a lot of professional domains, it seems like people don't take the time to prepare a lot of times. They don't think about certainly second and third order effects, and they don't prepare for that, right? And they take it as it comes, as it were. But if we look at the high performing teams, and we'll set the military aside because a lot of folks that are listening aren't military, but
Yeah, but
look at a football team or a whatever kind of athletic team, right? They're practicing all the time just for a very short performance. But they put so much effort into it. And like you say, hey, how might the other team come at us? What are they going to bring that we need to be prepared for?
yeah, and all too often to me, I see teams, doesn't matter if it's military in the commercial world, the private sector, other segments of government, I see teams who think that a baseline of training is enough. The greatest lesson I ever learned in 37 years of military service occurred to me when I was a lieutenant junior grade at the 2-year mark in my service. It shaped the entire following 35 years. My
Yeah.
greatest failure ever because I assumed that the team that I was leading was ready. And in this case, it's 1983, showing my age. I'm a Lieutenant JG. I've been in a whopping 2 years. I'm 23 years old. I'm on a destroyer in Norfolk, and we are getting ready to. The Navy often deploys to different areas around the world. Normally, deployments are about 6 months on average, sometimes longer. But you go through a training cycle. You prepare. You make sure you're ready to go because now we are leaving Norfolk, and now in this case, we're going to go to the Mediterranean. So you're going to deal with at that time. You're going to deal with the Soviets. You're going to deal with Gaddafi. You're going to deal with
Yeah.
Assad in Syria. So you're prepared. You're trying to think to yourself, what do you got to do to get ready? One of my collateral duties, not my primary job, but one of my collateral duties was to run the naval gunfire support team on the ship. Those are the teams that actually fire the guns against targets both ashore and afloat. We did the training, we did the certifications, we did the drills, we got the score, we qualified, and I thought, okay, we're good to go. We deploy from Norfolk in October of 1983, and within 24 hours of leaving Norfolk, we get the classical naval message: detach from formation and proceed at best possible speed to a lat long. And I can still remember us plotting this latitude and longitude on a chart on the chart table on the bridge, and we're all
Yeah.
going, "Where is this place? What is it?" And as the quartermaster steps back, the navigator steps forward and says, "This looks to be close to an island called Grenada." I never heard of Grenada before I deployed. The next thing I know, we're max speed down to the island. We're the first naval vessel to show up as the rest of the because we had some intelligence collection abilities that enabled us to generate knowledge and understanding about what was going on the island.
Mhm.
And within about 24 hours, 48 hours of getting there, we actually executed an invasion. We dropped the 82nd Airborne into the Point Salinas airfield, which is on the south end of the island. We actually land a Marine expeditionary unit on the eastern side initially. So we put U.S. troops on the ground, and suddenly my ship is being tasked to provide naval gunfire support to them. I've never trained with them. I don't have charts, for example, of Grenada. We actually had to trick the computer. We developed a grid system because we didn't have charts. So it shows you the ingenuity of sailors to get the computer system to work. And one day we get a mission to provide fire support for a SEAL team just north of the capital, St. George's, at a radio station in which the SEALs went there to blow the radio tower. While the SEALs were at this facility, they started taking fire from Grenada Self-Defense Forces as well as some Cuban engineers that were deployed. And suddenly on the radio, we get this call for fire about it, and the SEAL team is saying, "Look, we're pinned down. We've got several
Yeah.
wounded. We need to break contact. We just need you to fire some rounds." So the bad guys put their head down, and then we'll break contact. As soon as they put their head down, when the rounds come in, we'll break contact, and we'll move away. And I'm thinking, "Okay, we've trained. We're ready to go." We're executing this first call for fire, and the way this works is there's a computer system down in the kind of war room, if you will, in the center of a ship. That's where I am. And
Mhm.
then there's a visual set up on the bridge, and you correlate the two to make sure you know exactly where you are. Because if you don't know where you are, you're not going to aim what you're hitting at. So I get the computer solution. I'm waiting for the bridge to give me the visual solution. And my commanding officer is telling me, "Okay, Mike, what's going on? Why is this taking so long?" I turn to my sound powered phone talker to say, where's the answer from the bridge? Does the solution correlate? And can I execute can I fire this mission? My phone talker says to me, "Sir, I don't know, but it sounds like there's utter chaos on the bridge." I go running up to the bridge, on the type of destroyer I'm on, it's just immediately below. I go running up the ladder, undog the hatch, go up, it's the middle of general quarters, everybody's in their combat gear, and I'm going, "What is going on?" And it turns out one of the petty officers on this team who was taking visual bearings on the island to make sure we had a precise Latin longitude, a precise
Mhm.
visual based on a chart. He says, sir, I can't do this. I can't take a life. I can't take any of these bearings." We quickly replace the guy. We execute the mission. But I said to myself, "Rogers, you utterly failed in the greatest test of any military leader. You did not perform to expectations and to your training in combat. You are an utter failure." Man, and my takeaway from that experience was, I will never again be part of a team that's not prepared. The way I failed was I assumed, "Hey, we had the training, we're good to go, we know the process." I didn't sit down with the team and say, "Okay, do we understand that in executing this mission and firing these guns, we are potentially gonna take human lives? Are we ready for this, and is everybody comfortable with that? Because if you're not, I understand, but we need to pull you off the team, because when we get into combat, we have got to deliver. We got men and women on the other end of this who are counting on us." And I didn't do that. And I thought to myself, "Rogers, you failed to prepare this team for actual execution. You trained them, but you didn't prepare them, and it's not the same thing." I never, ever forgot that lesson. And I spent 35 subsequent years trying to make sure that any team I was ever part of, we were always going to be prepared. So I had a reputation at times in the military. Rogers is this really focused, driving guy. And I'm going, "Yeah, and there's a reason, guys." Number one, I had combat time at a very junior time in a period when this is well before Desert Storm. This is well before
Yeah.
the kinds of things that we saw later in the post 9/11 environment. And that experience just told me to be prepared takes a higher level of focus leadership. And we got to really ask ourselves, well, what does preparation really mean? And how does that correlate to success? And it shaped everything I ever did for 35 years. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you shared that story because I remember when you told me that story the first time that it just,
And my greatest failure,
it's
and
powerful.
I never forgot it. The only thing I would do is say, "Thank God this happened when I was relatively junior,"
Yeah.
and not leading a fleet, not when I was leading a combatant command, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Well, it gets to this idea that preparation is more than doing sit-ups or push-ups or
yeah,
working on some Excel spreadsheet or whatever it may be. Like it's so much preparation is between our ears, right? And so making sure that we've prepared our mindsets. So such a great story and powerful lesson in that. What you shared really fits perfectly with the scientific literature on preparation and success. So
mm,
studies have shown that preparation enhances, it makes sense, right? But decision making under pressure, when we
yep,
have prepared for those moments, then it's more automated in a sense, right? It increases our confidence. We've been here before, at least cognitively, psychologically, and so we're more confident, and we don't have as many errors as a result. And so that's really valuable scientific stuff. There was this study by Goldwitzer and Sheeran on implementation intentions, that's what they called it,
mm,
that show that planning ahead, especially using those listeners that are out there who have experience with computer coding,
right?
in the past, if then sort of strategies. If
Oh, yeah,
this thing happens, then that thing. That actually dramatically improves execution in these high
mm,
stakes kind of situations. And you were talking earlier about this idea of what are 5 different ways. If they do this, then we will respond with that kind of thing. And so that increases our capabilities and success. And then additionally, when we take time to prepare our mindset, which we were just talking about, through using a concept called the pre-mortem, which we've discussed on a previous episode of the podcast, our likelihood of success increases substantially. In fact, research on that type of anticipatory thinking shows that organizations and leaders who prepare for potential setbacks outperform those who focus only on best case scenarios. And that practice not only improves resilience, but strengthens the team collaboration because everybody really feels more invested in the outcomes. And in fact, Gary Klein has done research, among others, has done research on this that shows that this idea of the premortem reduces cognitive biases and increases the likelihood of success by 30%. So,
Wow.
a lot of science that
Right.
supports this concept of what we're
I have
talking
to
about
admit,
here.
when I look back on my career, the things that I'm proudest of are performance in crisis, to see how a team came together to deal with
Yeah,
the unexpected and then excelled in dealing with that unexpected, and how all the training, all the preparatory work all paid
yeah,
off. And you watch these men and women, and I can remember telling a couple times when things were going when we were dealing with a crisis and the team was down a little bit, and I can remember saying to them, "Look, we will figure out why this happened later, but for right now, let's focus on how we're gonna deal with it, number 1. Number 2, you have trained yourself. You're in this job for a reason. We're about to show this adversary that they messed with the wrong team. We're
yeah,
gonna go out and the proverbial kick their ass. So let's strap it
yeah,
on and let's go, you guys." And
yeah,
then I also talked to the team about we're now about to show the rest of our own team, the broader, in this case, this was something that particularly happened when I was a 3-star in the Navy. And I said, we're about to show the rest of the United States Navy exactly what we can do. And I said, I don't know about you guys, but that motivates the hell out of me. I can't wait. I'm sorry in this case, an adversary had penetrated part of our network. So we are trying to drive them out and we lost temporary control of the network. But watching how the team pivoted, watching how we developed a strategy, watching how we drove them out, and watching how we got stronger. Another thing I always told the team when we're in the middle of a crisis and we're trying to say what our objective is, my objective is not to return to the previous state. My objective is to come out stronger out of every crisis we ever deal with. So
yeah.
don't tell me about how, well, sir, we just want to drive them out and return to the way we were. And my attitude was, well, the way we were clearly failed. So that's not the desired end state.
Right.
We want to be stronger. We want to be better. And I also thought, another thing I used to tell the team, always take advantage of a crisis.
Yeah,
Look, I'm my self-image as a military guy was I was a warrior, but I also used to tell the team, but we got to acknowledge we're in a big bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are resistant to change. Bureaucracies don't like doing things new, and bureaucracies are often risk adverse.
yeah,
Guys, we're going to use this crisis to drive away all those attributes of a bureaucracy, and we're going to use this crisis to get this bureaucracy to be willing to take more risk, to be more aggressive, more innovative, and to invest more resources in a particular set of areas where we think that needs to be done. I said, we're going to come out of this stronger. I always
yeah.
loved that. I always
Well,
loved watching those men and women.
yeah, I mean, you make a great point. Hey, if we're in this situation, that means that going back to the way we were is probably not a good idea. So we want to be
NSO
better.
let us down, guys. So we
Yeah,
ain't going back this time.
right. And then as you say, the seeing the team like there's this satisfaction, the gratitude. There's so much that goes when, hey, look, we as a team, we've come together on this thing. We've prepared, worked hard, and now it's our time. This is our moment to do what we have been
Yep.
planning to
This is
do.
what
And
we trained for. This is what we prepared for.
yeah, and then to succeed on that mission is like that's just a phenomenal experience. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
even now. I mean, this happened almost 15 now when I look back, this happened almost 15 years ago, but I still run into people who participated in this who will constantly bring this up to me about how proud they are about, how we reacted, how empowered they felt, how positive they felt afterwards, and how they didn't have their head down. They had their head up in terms of, we're going to show this adversary that what we can do, and we're going to show the rest of the service and by extension the department what we can do. We were innovative. We were aggressive. Oh man, you watch motivated men and women really making a difference, using their experience, their knowledge. Even now, 15 years later, people walk up to me all the time and want to talk about it. It was called Operation Rolling Tide was the name we gave to it. ORT in slang. Guys will always say, "Hey, sir, you remember ORT?" And I go, "Oh yeah, guys, you never forget big, big challenges like that."
Yeah, that's great. Well, so we've talked about preparing for success, what that is, and why it's important. If you had 3 to 5 kind of steps or keys that can help leaders to prepare themselves and their teams for success, what would those be?
So, among the things I think about are, what do you think are keystones to and takeaways for strong leadership? So, number one, never underestimate the power of confidence as a
Mhm,
leader. I mean, I can remember thinking back in my career with working for people who occasionally were, head were down, they were negative. And my view was, hey, look, I want to be realistic. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but I want people to understand I am confident in our ability to execute the mission. I am confident in them. And I believe we're here at this place in this time to do good things. So always I thought, particularly when things start to go bad, and the team, like I said in that one example with what I called Operation Rolling Tide, I can remember the first briefing when the team is telling me, "Hey, sir, we've lost control of the networks. The Iranians are inside," and their heads are down and they're very hesitant. And I said, "Okay, I need everybody. It's game time. I need everybody's heads up. This is exactly what we trained for, and we're about to show these guys just what we can do." So let's get moving. And I want you to make sure that everybody else on the team has that same approach, that same attitude. We've got to be confident professionals. We're not boastful and we're not arrogant. but we are confident. And we're
Mm,
confident in no small part because we've trained and prepared. Secondly, you have to be prepared to take uncertainty as a leader. You just can't knee jerk every time something goes wrong. You got to be steady and you've got to project the qualities that you want your team to take away. So, hey, look, when things go wrong, we're going to deal with it. We're not going to fall apart. We're not going to collapse. Hey, we're not going to be able to anticipate everything we're likely to deal with. That's okay. We've done good training. We've done good prep work. We'll have a good starting position. We'll deal with it. The power of team is everything. It's not
mm,
about us as individuals. It's about the team and the mission. Always focus on the team and the mission and everything will work out. When you start focusing on yourself, that's when you start to have problems and it starts to go really wrong. And particularly as you get more senior, one that yeah, I can remember when I'm dealing with presidents, this came up. You must always have the moral integrity to
mm,
do what you think is right and not be intimidated by the seniority of the people that you are dealing with. It's easy to say that, but I watched, as I became more senior and I find myself in the White House Situation Room and in the Oval Office, and I'm watching the cabinet and I'm watching deal with the President of the United States, and I'm being asked to provide an input and deal with particular situations. I'm watching the way people are talking, and I'm thinking to myself, you really don't believe, you're really uncertain. What you seem to me to be projecting is uncertainty, but you're trying to mask it. And you've got to be willing to speak truth to power. I still
yeah.
remember I'd been in the job about a year. I'm with the national security team, and we're briefing President Obama because he liked to talk every 2 weeks about the ISIS campaign. So, the combatant commanders, CENTCOM, Special Operations Command, Cyber Command would be present, with the secretary, and then we did kind of an intelligence where I was there with NSA in the sit room with the president, CIA, the director of national intelligence, the cabinet part of the national security team. And at the end of an update one day, he out of the blue, he turns to me, President Obama, and he says, "Hey, Mike, we're spending a lot of money in the post Snowden era to ensure our security is enhanced. Can you assure me that this money that we're spending will assure that we'll never have another security incident like this again?" And I'm sitting here thinking, "Oh, this is interesting." I got the Secretary of Defense, my boss is there, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is there, the Vice President, the Chief of Staff, National Security Advisor, the Cabinet. And I said, "No, sir, I can't guarantee that. What I believe that this investment will do is ensure that a breach of this magnitude and this duration becomes highly unlikely. But if you
Mhm.
want me to guarantee that we'll never have another security breach, if it's designed by man, it can be defeated by man. No, sir, I don't think I could say that to you." And President Obama says, "Thanks, Mike," walks out. And I'm looking and I can tell the Secretary of Defense is a little unhappy with my answer because he felt, Mike, you should have projected more confidence. And I said, "Sir, I'm trying to be realistic." I didn't think a thing about it. 2 years later, at the end of the Obama administration, I get involved in something that turned out to be very political. I wind up on the front page of the
Mm.
Washington Post, the New York
Oh,
Times, the Wall Street Journal. And in this article, which was leaked by my boss tells the world, "Oh, I wanted to fire Rogers. And I wanted to fire him for some amount of time." President Obama reaches out to me and, says he wants to apologize that I got undercut like that in the media. I thought, "Well, sir, you got much bigger things to worry about than me." But I literally we do another update meeting. It's now this newspaper thing is out, and President Obama expresses his frustration that members of the team are undercutting each other, and he talks about how that is not loyalty, that is not professionalism, and I don't wanna ever see anything like that again. I get asked to stay behind with the chief of staff, and so I'm in the chief of staff of the White House's office, and I'm just waiting, and I said, "Dennis, why am I here?" And I said, "Look, if my boss wanted to fire me, the president can always do that." And he said to me, "Mike, President Obama was never gonna fire you. You remember that time 2 years ago he asked you that question about Snowden?" He said, "Mike, he has never ever forgotten that. He always raises this about you, that he knows that you will be somebody that always tells him the truth no matter how uncomfortable it might be." He said, "Mike, he had your back every day after that." So again, I'm thinking to myself, I didn't know that, number 1. Number 2, I didn't think I did anything exceptional. I just tried to speak truth to power. Hey, that's what I'm supposed to do. You just so I one of my takeaways from that experience was always speak truth to power, because the price of not doing that could be much higher than you realize at the time.
mhm.
And once you go down that road, it is really hard to get your boss's confidence back in you when you go down that road.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that story. There's so many things that happen behind the scenes, that we as a nation have no inkling of, and so that's a great example. And to the point that the media, whatever comes out on the front page, there's always more to the story. Always. It may be good, it may be bad, it may be different, but there's always more to the story.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, I think folks have forgotten that in our society. Having confidence, that's really important with regards to preparation. I think those two are,
right. Not arrogance,
yeah.
not boastfulness. That's not the same thing. I always correlated confidence to professionalism. It's an element of being professional to me. Now you got to make sure you have the grounds for that confidence. That's where that training, that's where that preparation, that's where that leadership, that's where that prioritization comes into place. And the last one in this is not universal. It's something that was always important to me. I always believed that humility for a leader was very important. Now, part of this is just because I hated working for arrogant, boastful people, and I have worked for arrogant and boastful people.
Yeah.
I just thought, I don't want to be around you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't want to be part of any organization or team that you lead. So I always tried to, treat everybody with respect. I always tried to be humble. And sometimes it manifests itself in little things like on service dress blue, which is the United States Navy dress uniform for
Mhm.
officers. You don't have to wear a name tag. It's actually considered an optional uniform item.
Okay.
But I wore a name tag every day because I didn't want anybody to assume that they knew my name because, hey, I'm a four-star. I got the big gold braids. I got the people following me. I'm like, yeah, everybody knows who Rogers is. No, I wore a name tag. And I'm up on the hill testifying one day. And I actually had a staffer come up to me and say, hey, Admiral, we just want you to know we recognize what you're trying to project here. And he highlighted the name tag to me. He said, we know you don't have to wear that. We know that you do this in part because you're trying to send a message. And I thought to myself, who the hell but me would ever, would ever recognize that or would ever know that?
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of the opposite side of that story, basically. When I was when I was in the Air Force, I was at Little Rock Air Force Base, and I
A
had to
lot of
go.
C-130s at Little Rock.
That's right, home of the Herc.
Yeah, baby.
And so I still, my kids know. I see them. I'm going to say four fans of freedom anyway. But I had to go down to get my military driver's license, right? So I had to walk from our medical group down, I don't know, quarter mile, half mile, something across the base, and get my driver's license, for military driver's license. And so I was walking back, and it was a summer day, in Arkansas, hot as can be, and the sun's beaming down. It's the middle of the day, and I'm walking a little bit head down, right, so that my cover is blocking the sun out of my eyes. And down the road comes a vehicle, a car, okay, and the car comes to a screeching halt, and the person honks the horn and points to the bumper that's got an eagle on it,
Yeah, I was going to say a rank emblem.
and I had to come to attention and salute. But I was a terrible person because I was trying not to go blind, and this guy, all he was caring about was the fact that he's got a bird. So totally different approach. I'm fairly certain that person didn't make it to a higher echelon.
We hopefully hope not. Hopefully
Right. So before we wrap up, I was just wondering, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice about leadership, and preparation, what would it be?
the one thing I'd probably do differently, I particularly when I was junior, I was pretty intense, as I said, because of that experience I had at
Sure.
the 2-year mark, man. As I look back, I probably should have been a little bit less intense. I was always, "Come on, we're here to work hard. Let's go. If you're not ready for that, find another team. We're gonna work hard. We're gonna be the best we can be. We're gonna constantly push ourselves." And for some people, they found that wearing. They found that irritating. They just
Yeah.
didn't like that, and I probably could have been a little bit more effective in the way I went about
Sure.
doing it. That's probably the biggest thing I would say to
Yeah.
self. And then number 2, always be open to the power of possibility. You don't there's no one single path to success if you define success as promotion, if you define success as particular jobs, if you define success as the ability to execute particular things. I was very fortunate. I found the military to be the ultimate meritocracy that I directly benefited from. Again, it was as I kid my children, your father was lucky because in many ways it was all about timing. I reached senior levels at a time when suddenly cyber was a focus for the department. They wanted to invest, they wanted to increase, they were trying to create. I became a senior leader, in intelligence and ran NSA, one of the most technical intelligence organizations, at a time when the world was becoming increasingly technical, when
Mhm.
technology and technical solutions to problems were increasingly looked as advantages. And so I found myself by the time I got to the 30-year mark, no one in my special the Navy had ever been a three-star admiral in the history of the Navy. I became the first one. It wasn't about Mike Rogers. It was about the skill set, this training, this experience that I had been given suddenly was perceived to be much more value. Nobody ever been a four-star. Nobody ever been a numbered fleet commander in the history of the Navy in my special. Nobody ever been a command commander or run the largest intel organization. I tell people that isn't to say, oh, look at Mike Rogers. That's to say, always be open to possibility. If I had told myself, Oh, well, that's never gonna happen, and then I had bosses who were willing to give me that opportunity. When I was in '06, I ultimately got hired by a chairman of the Joint Chiefs to be his special assistant, to be his thinker. I went with him everywhere he traveled in the world, every meeting he attended. He said, "Mike, I want you with me because I want you to help me think my way through what this information I'm receiving means, what should it be, how should it play out in the strategic vision that I have as a chairman, providing military advice to the president and the secretary, as well as my vision for what the department should be." And I literally said to him, "Sir, why would you waste a slot for that kind of job on a guy like me? The guy you wanna put in that job is gonna be a combatant commander one day. Sir, I'm never gonna be a combatant commander. Nobody in my specialty ever goes beyond 1 or 2 stars." I said, "I'm very grateful, but I think you're wasting this opportunity." And he just looks at me and he says, "Mike, let me be the judge of that." I was like, "Okay, sir."
Don't tell me how to do my job, right?
And I'm sitting here thinking, he literally I'm an '06, I got, 22 years in, and he literally has laid out for me what's gonna happen for the next 15 years. I had no clue, I had no idea, but he was open to possibility. He said, "Ah, the future's changing." I always try to remember that. I always try to make sure I work that for others as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that final thought with us. Admiral Mike Rogers, it has been a delight to get to speak with you again. Thank you for being a guest on Science Leadership today.
No, thank you for the opportunity, Tom, and for your listeners, look, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how senior, it doesn't matter how junior you are, it doesn't matter where you're working. Leadership is all about the ability to maximize the value of others in achieving a mission, and it is so critical to the well-being of our nation and the success of any organization we're all a part of.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.